The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
Hey guys, my name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is November 6, 2025, and once again we are going to look at the situation within Ukraine. So, let's begin. First of all, we are going to look at the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Russians have seized majority control over the southern half of the town of Pomorsk. They have taken control over this strip of land here, which is alongside the Dnieper River, and have also seized areas just outside of the town of Stepnogorsk, which, as of today, still is or remains to be contested. The Russians have reportedly have advanced as far as the town center itself, but we have no confirmations whatsoever of the Russians actually being in the town center. Like, actually consolidating their positions, that is. But anyway, let's move further eastward towards the Guleyapol direction. And more bad news is coming in for the armed forces of Ukraine. Things are getting worse. Apparently, the Vostok group, which is the army group for the Russians, which overlook this direction here, have been mostly radio silent for the majority of this week, mainly because they were busy clashing with the armed forces of Ukraine for the strategic village of Uspinovka. And once they're able to capture Uspinovka, as I said in one of my last videos, then Guleyapol is pretty much a sitting duck waiting to be killed. And also, there is a report that the village of Solodiki has been captured by the Russians, at least according to Ukrainian sources, and Deep State has even put a part of this village under a gray zone. And to be quite honest with you guys, I think it's going to be captured pretty quickly once Uspinovka falls, and I think all these other villages down south of Uspinovka are also going to fall pretty quickly. Ukrainians have put a fierce fight for this village, but in the end, it didn't really matter. Now, there's also a report that the Russians have entered the village of Oristopil. It's currently contested right now, and we can only wonder what's going on over there. And if I have to be honest with you guys, I think the armed forces of Ukraine are getting their butts whooped, as always, in the Dnipropetrovsk region. And in addition, there's even a isolated report that a Russian DRG grouping was able to sneak into the town of Pokrovsky. Now, this report I kind of doubt, because how the hell did the Russians get this far? Like, way past the line of combat contact. That would be really absurd, like, if this were to be the case. But also, it would mean that the Ukrainian defenses here literally no longer exist. And the only thing that will be protecting the town of Pokrovsky is, of course, the Volcha River. But if Ivanovka were to tell us anything, it's that the Volcha River is not a reliable defense. Now, going also eastward, the pocket north of Dachny, which is, or was, the very first settlement in the Dnipropetrovsk region to be seized by Russia, has been cleared out. The armed forces of Ukraine have all but been forced back into the village of Novopavlovka, and also there is a reliable reports circulating, that is, that the Russians have already seized the majority, or at least a part, of the southern part of Novopavlivka. And they are advancing pretty quickly within this village. And to be quite honest with you guys, I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the month, so I guess by Turkey Day or so, that Novopavlivka falls to the Russians. And once that happens, then the Russians will have no issues whatsoever consolidating their control over the areas that they have already in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and they will be set forth to attack the town of Mizova, which is up north. Now, getting to the hottest part of the front, and that is, of course, Pokrovsk itself, or Krasnaya Amisk, as some people like to call it. The majority of the city, like 95% of the city of Pokrovsk, is under full Russian control. Do not listen to the fake news that the so-called reporting from Ukraine reports. Pokrovsk, for the most part, has fallen to the Russians. Not only has the southern and the central part of the city has fallen to Russian control, but so has the majority of the northern half of the city of Pokrovsk as well. In fact, right now, the Dina's neighborhood, which consists of these commie blocks here, is about to be captured by the Russians, and it's probably going to be official tomorrow, that is, that the city of Pokrovsk will be under full Russian control. These neighborhoods are also being cleared out of Ukrainians too, and there's even reports that the Russians are going to begin fighting for the town of Grishino very soon as well. So, with Pokrovsk on the brink of being captured by the Russians, all these guys here in Lisovka, Suky Yar, and, of course, Mayanograd are all now in a full-blown cauldron. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have our first full-blown encirclement for the first time since 2022, via the Battle of Mariupol. This is arguably the worst encirclement of the armed forces of Ukraine in over 3 years, and because of what is happening here, there are reports that the armed forces of Ukraine are trying to break these guys out from Hrishine, or Grishino, that is, to try to give them a passageway. And they're even trying to break the encirclement through the town of Rudensky, which is partly now a gray zone, despite the fact that Russia captured it a week or so ago. Ukrainians are also getting very aggressive in the Dobropila direction, even though I don't really like covering this front because there's so much fake bullshit here. And as far as Syriac is concerned, it looks like the armed forces of Ukraine are about to clear out the remainder of the breakthrough that happened 3 months ago, that is, in August 2025. So the armed forces of Ukraine are likely going to kick the Russians out of the village or town of Shakove. And yeah, the Russians are basically back to square one. Now, as for it potentially unblocking the city of Mayanograd itself, hell to the fucking no. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's a bunch of Delulu nonsense. If anything, the armed forces of Ukraine are just trying to get these guys, that is. Sorry if I had to slip up the tongue there. To get these guys rescued from being in a cauldron themselves. So, once Shakove is cleared for the armed forces of Ukraine, then Volodymyrivka will likely be recaptured, and then that will be it. So yeah, the Russians are pretty much back to square one. Not much they can really do, honestly, until Pokrovsk has been captured, along with Mayanograd. And until that time comes, the Russians will continue to struggle here. But what I do expect to happen after Pokrovsk falls is that the Russians will try to rebuild the area of breakthrough from August 2025. And to me, it's going to come down to what happens to Beletsky and Hrishine, or Grishino, that is. So yeah, Russians are continuing to struggle in there. Now, in the Konstantinovka direction, the Russians are advancing in the eastern parts of the city, and there is a big gray zone, as you can see here, in these low-rise areas, so it's all like private housing units. The Russians are apparently this far into Konstantinovka, and they are not too far from the city center itself, though I will say that they got a bigger challenge ahead of them because all these commie blocks here are still under Ukrainian control. Plashivka, I think, is now under full Russian control too, which is good for them, and Ivanopilia, which is one of the last settlements before entering Konstantinovka, is contested right now. So, going up north, it appears that the town of Siversk is now contested between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and the battle has started from the southern direction, though the Russians have, as of this video, have yet to capture the village of Zivanovka. Now, in addition, Yampol here, which was majority captured by the Russians, had a counterattack ignited by the armed forces of Ukraine, and it appears that they have managed to push the Russians back from majority of the town. And as far as I'm concerned, this should buy time for the Ukrainians in Liman, though it can only do so much work. And in addition, the Russians have captured over half of Stavki and are contesting again right now for the town of Dobryshive. Russians are also advancing in the direction of the key town of Svetoyorsk. Sorry if I cannot pronounce this. Let me try to read this again. Svetoyorsk. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to work on my Slavic pronunciations, that is. Sorry if I butchered it hard. But you all know what I'm saying. And you all know what I'm talking about. Not much really going on here in the village of Rikodub, though we can assume that the Russians have the advantage there. And then, in the Kupiansk direction, there's a bit of confusion surrounding this area. Apparently, the armed forces of Ukraine are trying to push back the Russians from Kupiansk, a city center itself, basically the main part of the city. But the Russians, however, have countered by continuing to advance on the eastern side of Kupiansk too. So even if the Ukrainians were to cut this area off, the Russians will be able to supply Kupiansk through the eastern side, that is. And to me, I think they're going to succeed in doing that. Though it is not yet quite certain if the Russians will be able to maintain the supplies going into Kupiansk itself. If anything, this kind of resembles how things looked in the Kharkiv direction 3 years ago, in September 2022, when the Russians were trying to keep control of Kupiansk. So yeah. Russians are also continuing to advance on Dovrychensky from the north and also from the south too. Like they're looking to eat it, like sandwich it up. And then in the town of Volchansk, the battle here is coming to a close with all these areas here now being under confirmed Russian control. And it's very likely that Volchansk is probably not going to see Turkey Day. Maybe it could, maybe it may not, but I definitely think it's going to fall before the end of 2025 as we know it. And that's going to do it for today's video, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm sorry if I took a long break. I think it's been a whole week or so since my last video. I mean, when nothing is happening, you just decide, you know what, I'm just going to take a break for a while from making videos. And that's exactly what I did. So I apologize if it's been a while, but it is what it is. It's back to videos every 3 days until I announce another hiatus, which I'll definitely tell you guys about. Probably around Thanksgiving week, but also the Christmas period too in the West. So I hope all of you have a great day, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye. Peace out.